At the Battle of Cannae, roughly 10,000 Roman soldiers were taken prisoner. A significant portion of them are believed to have been troops who had remained in reserve or in the rear. According to accounts, Varro, known as the commanding officer on that day, managed to escape with about 50 cavalrymen. In addition, approximately 4,500 infantrymen and around 200 cavalrymen are said to have survived and fled the battlefield. Among those who survived was Publius Cornelius Scipio, a young cavalry officer who was about 19 years old at the time. Through this, he accumulated experience in 3 engagements against Hannibal. Not only Scipio, but many young officers from prominent families also survived the Battle of Cannae. They sought to build political careers through military service. It is therefore highly likely that the Roman High Command assigned them mainly to rear or auxiliary units rather than to the most dangerous positions at the front. Notably, Scipio later married the daughter of Consul Polus, who had fallen in this battle.
Hannibal's brother Mago returned to Carthage to deliver news of the victory. It is said that the amount of gold rings he had collected from the fallen Roman soldiers formed a heap as large as a mound. Rome accepted the defeat in silence. The official mourning period for bereaved families was drastically reduced from the customary 1 year to just 30 days. At the time, the majority of Roman citizens had lost husbands, sons, or brothers, and there was a serious risk that the entire city would sink into grief and despair. Had the traditional 1-year mourning period been maintained, the entire country would have remained engulfed in a funerary atmosphere, potentially paralyzing the functioning of the city. Moreover, Rome needed to replenish immediately the massive losses suffered at Cannae. Ultimately, Rome limited the mourning period to 30 days in order to prevent a collapse of national morale. If the entire city were immersed in mourning, the atmosphere for conscription would have been severely undermined.
In this context of national crisis, an event that perfectly embodied the saying misfortunes never come singly occurred. When Rome mobilized a massive force of more than 80,000 men for the decisive battle at Cannae, it had also dispatched 2 legions totaling about 9,000 troops to the Gallic front in the Po Valley to the north. However, shortly after the disaster at Cannae, these 2 legions, led by the praetor Postumius, were ambushed while pursuing Gallic forces and were virtually annihilated. Postumius himself was killed in the fighting. Thus, in addition to the horrific losses at Cannae, Rome lost valuable manpower on the Gallic front as well, suffering an overwhelming depletion of military strength within a very short period. The Roman Republic truly found itself in a life-or-death crisis.
As he had done before, Hannibal unconditionally released non-Roman citizens among the prisoners who came from Rome's allied cities. He then began in earnest a strategy of persuasion and pressure aimed at detaching cities in southern Italy from Rome. As news of Rome's crushing defeat at Cannae spread, many southern cities began to tilt toward Hannibal. Some voluntarily opened their gates to his army. However, Rhegium, a strategic stronghold north of Bruttium, remained loyal to Rome and held out to the end. Above all, the event that dealt Rome the greatest shock was the defection of Capua. Capua was the second largest and wealthiest city in Campania, after Rome itself, and it possessed immense strategic importance. Capua's defection triggered a cascade of nearby cities turning their backs on Rome. As a result, cracks began to appear in Rome's Italian alliance system, starting from the south.
After the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal spent the winter in Capua, reorganizing his forces. During this time, he attempted to negotiate with Rome regarding the Roman citizen soldiers he held as prisoners. He He proposed to release them in exchange for ransom. The amount he demanded is said not to have deviated significantly from the customary rates of the time. The number of prisoners amounted to roughly 8,000, enough men to form 2 full legions. Nevertheless, after intense debate, the Roman Senate rejected Hannibal's proposal. This was a political decision made with national morale and the preservation of the alliance system in mind. Paying money to Hannibal at this moment would have created the impression that Rome was weakening, potentially encouraging allied cities to defect. Instead, in order to compensate for the shortage of manpower, Rome began purchasing slaves with state funds and arming them for service. It promised freedom to those who distinguished themselves in battle. Although this departed from the traditional principle of a citizen militia, it demonstrated Rome's institutional flexibility in the face of crisis.
In the year following the Battle of Cannae, in 215 BCE, Fabius Maximus and Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus were elected consuls at Rome. Although the process formally involved elections, the outcome was in reality heavily influenced by the Senate. Gracchus possessed proven military ability, while Fabius was the former dictator who had previously pursued a strategy of attrition. Rome had come to realize that it had little chance of victory in a direct confrontation with Hannibal, and therefore decided to return to a war of attrition. This time, however, the strategy was combined with the dispersal of multiple legions to constrain Hannibal's movements. While Roman forces avoided direct clashes with Hannibal himself, they actively engaged Carthaginian commanders operating without his direct supervision. Hannibal's victory at Cannae had secured him control over large parts of southern Italy, but this also meant a dramatic increase in the number of cities and alliances that required defense and oversight. Hannibal alone could not manage all of this, and as a result, Rome's strategy of dispersal gradually began to take effect.
Although Hannibal achieved a great victory at Cannae and succeeded in seizing much of southern Italy, he was unable to fully institutionalize this control on his own terms. In Carthage itself, divisions persisted between hardliners and moderates over how the war against Rome should be conducted. Consequently, Hannibal did not receive the reinforcements and supplies he had hoped for. As time passed, Rome gradually recovered, while Hannibal's army accumulated fatigue and strain from prolonged occupation and extensive territorial control. At one point, taking advantage of Rome's apparent weakness, King Philip V of Macedon sought to challenge Rome by aligning himself with Hannibal. Rome, however, effectively contained this threat through a combination of military response and diplomatic isolation. Rather than engaging in large-scale warfare directly in the Greek world, Rome adopted a strategy of counterbalancing Macedon by leveraging local powers, such as the Aetolian League. The conflict then continued in a stalemated state for several years.
In 212 and 211 BCE, the Second Punic War reached a major turning point. Rome laid siege to Capua, the most important of the southern Italian cities that had defected, and ultimately recaptured it. The fall of Capua deprived Hannibal of his most critical stronghold, dealing him a severe blow. At the same time, it clearly impressed upon Rome's Italian allies that Rome's capacity for retaliation and its governing order remained firmly intact. Capua had previously rebelled against Rome during the Pyrrhic War, and by once again defecting during Hannibal's war, it demonstrated a pattern of repeated betrayal. In response, Rome imposed exceptionally harsh punishment on the city. Although Capua was not physically destroyed, its autonomy was completely abolished. Its citizenship rights and allied status were entirely revoked, reducing the city to a directly subordinated administrative unit of Rome.
By decree
Moreover,
of the Senate,
many prominent figures and
assets of
members
the
of the
Claudii
elite
are
who had
forfeit.
sided with Hannibal were
Decimus
executed or
Claudius,
exiled,
exiled
and their properties were confiscated in full. These measures went beyond mere retaliation. They served as an exemplary punishment, intended to demonstrate to all of Italy the consequences of betraying Rome.
During the same period, Rome secured strategic stability in the Western Mediterranean by capturing Syracuse in Sicily. Syracuse had long been one of Rome's key allies. However, in 215 BCE, the political situation deteriorated rapidly after the death of its aging ruler, Hieron II. His grandson, who was about 16 years old, succeeded him. The young ruler was soon assassinated in a coup, and the faction that seized power subsequently broke the alliance with Rome and aligned itself with Hannibal.
In response, Rome entrusted the campaign against Syracuse to the consul Marcus Claudius Marcellus, known as the Sword of Rome. After a prolonged siege, Syracuse fell in 212 BCE and came under Roman control. In this way, Rome gradually recovered strategic initiative not only on the Italian mainland, but also in the surrounding regions. As a result, although Hannibal remained a formidable presence on the battlefield, he was increasingly pushed into a defensive posture without achieving a decisive strategic breakthrough. Ultimately, the period from 215 to 211 BCE can be assessed as a phase in which, despite Hannibal's continued tactical superiority, Rome adapted to a prolonged war by mobilizing its full national capacity and laying the groundwork for eventual counteroffensives. That is all for today. See you in the next episode. Thank you for watching.